You're on a plane, somewhere over the middle of an ocean, and you are profoundly bored. Your seat is reclined, the little screen is glowing, and you're watching that tiny cartoon airplane inch across a field of solid blue. 11 hours to go. You know your altitude, your speed, the local time where you're landing, and the exact number of miles of empty water between you and the nearest scrap of land. There's Wi-Fi. There are snacks. There is a map that knows precisely where you are, down to the pixel. Crossing an entire ocean has somehow become just about the most boring thing a person can do. Now take all of it away. The screen. The map. The little miles counter. Take away the certainty that there is any land out there at all. Put yourself in a small open canoe, on that same water, under that same sky, and point yourself at that same endless horizon, with nothing but the stars, the waves, and whatever is inside your own head to find the way. Because here is the thing that should genuinely stop you. Long before maps, before the compass, before writing, before the wheel, ancient humans were crossing thousands of miles of open ocean. On purpose, and somehow finding tiny islands they had no way of knowing were even out there. So how? How did people with no instruments cross the biggest, emptiest spaces on the whole planet, and not simply vanish into them? Let's go. Start with the most obvious question, the one you're already asking. What were they even sailing in? Because when you picture ancient people and the sea, you might picture something flimsy, a raft, a hollowed-out log, something you would not trust to cross a calm lake, let alone the open Pacific. And that picture is wrong, and it is the first thing we have to fix, because the boats these people built were not desperate driftwood. They were precision instruments. Picture a long, narrow canoe, and then lash a second smaller float to the side of it on outstretched arms. That is an outrigger, and that simple idea turns a tippy little hull into something astonishingly stable, something that can take an ocean swell without rolling over. Now go one better. Take two big hulls and join them with a deck across the top. You have just built a double canoe, a catamaran, thousands of years before that word existed. It is stable, it is fast, and it can carry serious weight. And they were fast. A good voyaging canoe under sail could outrun a lot of what came later. Rig a sail shaped a bit like a crab's claw, angle it into the wind, and one of these vessels could cover well over 100 miles in a single day. So get the flimsy raft out of your head completely. These were ocean-going ships, engineered over generations, built without a single metal nail, held together with lashed cord and an intuition for the sea that we are only now catching up to. And these canoes were not just carrying people. This is a detail that gives me chills. When a crew set out to settle a new island, they were not packing light. They loaded the canoe like an ark. Taro and yam and breadfruit shoots, wrapped and ready to plant. Coconuts. Live pigs, chickens, and dogs, riding along in a boat in the middle of the ocean. They were carrying an entire farm, an entire future, across open water, because they were not just going for a look. They were going to arrive somewhere empty and build a whole world out of what they brought with them. A voyaging canoe was not a vehicle, it was a seed, with people inside it. But here is where it gets hard, and here is the real problem this whole video is about. Because a good boat is not the hard part. Staying alive in it is. A boat only gets you into the ocean. It does absolutely nothing to solve the actual nightmare. And the nightmare is this. You are in the middle of a featureless blue circle. Every direction looks identical. There is no road, no sign, no coastline, nothing at all to steer by. And somewhere out there, days away, is your target, which might be an island a few miles wide, in an ocean that covers a third of the planet. Miss it, even slightly, and there is nothing behind it but thousands more miles of water, and a slow, quiet death. There is no coast guard, no radio, no one is coming to look for you, because no one knows where you are, least of all you. If your reading of the ocean is wrong, the ocean simply keeps its secret, and keeps you. So forget the boat. The real miracle, the thing that should break your brain a little, is the navigation. How on earth do you find a speck of land you cannot see, that you have possibly never seen, with no map and no compass and no instruments of any kind? The answer is that these navigators turned the entire natural world into a set of instruments. And the first one was over their heads the whole time. The stars. Now, we all know sailors use the stars, so this might not sound that impressive yet. But stay with me, because what they actually did with them is wild. A Pacific navigator did not just glance up and find one North Star. They memorized an entire compass made of stars. Here is the trick. As the night turns, a star rises at one specific point on the horizon, and hours later it sets at the mirror point on the other side. Learn where a star rises and sets, and it becomes a fixed bearing, a direction you can hold. Now do that for dozens and dozens of stars, a whole sequence of them rising through the night in the same track, one after another, so that as one climbs too high to be useful, the next one is already coming up behind it to take its place. That is a compass with no needle. It is held entirely in the memory, an encyclopedia of the sky, passed down by heart, out loud, for generations. And it was not a handful of stars. A trained navigator might carry the rising and setting points of well over 100 of them, along with which star belonged to which bearing at which time of year. Imagine holding the entire night sky in your memory as a working tool, not for its beauty, but for direction, the way you might hold a multiplication table, except the table is the heavens, and getting it wrong means you and everyone with you never sees land again. But the sky has a problem: clouds. And what do you do when the stars are gone? This is the part where it stops sounding like sailing and starts sounding like a superpower. Because when they lost the sky, they read the sea itself. The ocean is not random. It is being pushed by steady, distant winds into long, regular swells, sets of waves that roll in the same direction for hundreds of miles. And a skilled navigator learns to feel them. They can lie down in the bottom of the canoe and read, through their own body, the rhythm of the hull rising and falling, and tell you which swell is which and whether the boat is still holding its line. They are steering by feel, in the pitch dark, by the way the ocean lifts them. Meanwhile, the most impressive thing most of us can manage with our bodies on a boat is get seasick. And it goes deeper than that, almost unbelievably deep, because when a swell rolls across the open sea and slams into an island, it does not just stop. It bends around the island, and it bounces back off it, and it sends out a new pattern of ripples, an echo, spreading outward from that piece of land. Which means an island is broadcasting its own location, in the water, for miles in every direction, long before you can see it. And these navigators learn to feel that echo, to detect the faint interference of a swell that has bounced off land still over the horizon. In the Marshall Islands, they even mapped these patterns, tying together sticks and shells into a chart. Not a map of where the islands sit, but a map of how the water behaves around them. They were, quite literally, feeling for islands through the skin of the sea. And to keep track of all of it, some navigators used a mental trick so strange that outsiders took decades to even understand it. Instead of picturing themselves moving across a fixed sea toward a fixed island, they held the canoe still in their mind and imagined the islands themselves sliding past, in the dark, off to the side, one reference island moving backward behind the horizon as the voyage went on. The boat was the still point, and the whole ocean flowed past it. It is a completely different way of holding a journey in your head, and it let a navigator always know, without a chart, roughly how far along the voyage they were. They were running a live simulation of the entire ocean, in their skull, for days on end, and never writing a single thing down. And they did it while exhausted. A navigator on a long voyage could not really switch off. The stars kept turning, the swells kept shifting, the wind kept backing and veering, and the whole living picture had to be constantly updated or it quietly fell apart. Some would sleep only in snatches, trained to wake the instant the motion of the canoe changed, because the boat rocking to a different rhythm might mean the swells had shifted, and a shifted swell, unnoticed, was a slow turn in the wrong direction, and a target silently missed. And they were still not done, because they read the sky, and they read the water, and then they read everything living in between. Take the birds. Certain seabirds, like the little white tern, sleep on land but fish far out at sea by day, so they fly out over the water in the morning and back toward land at dusk, which makes them a signpost. Find one of those birds in the evening, follow the direction it is heading, and it will lead you home to an island you cannot yet see. Some navigators are even said to have carried birds aboard, and released one to watch which way it flew. A stationary cloud, sitting still while the others drift past, is often parked over an island, snagged there by the warm air rising off the land, and in some places the underside of that cloud glows faintly green, a reflection of a turquoise lagoon on an island still below the horizon. They read the color of the light in the sky to find land. And even that is not the whole toolkit. They watch the water itself change color where it shallowed over a distant reef. They notice the particular debris that drifts on currents near land, a stray leaf, a bit of wood, a certain kind of floating seed. Some navigators spoke of smelling land on the wind before they could see it, the green scent of an island carried out across the water. Every sense they had was pointed outward, gathering the faint, scattered hints that a world of water quietly leaks about where its islands are hiding. Nothing was too small to matter. A single bird, a single drifting branch, could be the clue that turned a guess into a heading. So let's just sit with what we have built here. These people had no compass, no map, no writing to record any of it. And yet they were reading the stars, the swells, the echoes of islands in the water, the flight of birds, the shape and color of clouds, the scent on the wind, all at once, weaving them together in real time into a single, moving picture of exactly where they were on the empty face of the planet. That is not luck. That is a science. It is just a science written in the sky and the sea instead of on a page, and it took a lifetime to learn. A master navigator was not made in a season. They were trained from childhood, sitting with elders, chanting the star paths, reading practice swells, absorbing a library of ocean knowledge that lived in people, not books, and could die with them if it was not handed on in time. And here is the scale of what that science pulled off, because I do not think it truly lands until you see the map. The Pacific Ocean is the single biggest feature on Earth. You could drop every continent into it and still have room to spare. And scattered across that unthinkable emptiness are thousands of tiny islands, most of them separated from each other by hundreds or thousands of miles of open water. And ancient people found them. Not a few of them. Basically all of them. They pushed out from the edge of Asia, island by island, generation by generation, across the entire ocean. Fiji, Tonga, Samoa, then a long pause, and then an explosion outward to the farthest corners. To Hawaii, thousands of miles to the north. To Rapa Nui, one of the most isolated inhabited spots on the whole planet. And finally, last of all, down to New Zealand, which was one of the very last large land masses anywhere on Earth that humans ever set foot on, settled only around 7 or 8 centuries ago. Think about that. When people were already building great cathedrals in Europe, New Zealand was still sitting there, empty, waiting for a fleet of canoes to come and find it. And to reach these places, a single canoe might carry dozens of people, their food, their water, and their animals, for weeks at a stretch, out of sight of any land at all. Try to feel the nerve that takes. Day after day, in every direction, nothing but water meeting sky in a perfect, unbroken circle, and you are steering toward a target smaller than the city you probably live in, on the word of a navigator reading ripples and starlight. And they hit it. Again, and again, and again, across the widest ocean on Earth. And when they arrived, they did not send back word. There was no letter home, no signal flare, no way to tell the people on the beach behind them that the gamble had paid off. A canoe would sail over the horizon and simply be gone from the world it left, its fate unknown, sometimes forever. Every single one of these voyages was a bet placed straight into silence, and the only way anyone at home might ever learn the answer was if, one day, a canoe came back. Which brings us to the myth we really need to break, because for a long time people simply could not accept what they were looking at. Faced with this staggering spread of humanity across the biggest ocean in the world, a lot of people decided it could not possibly have been on purpose. The story became that these were accidents, that fishermen got caught in storms, blown out to sea, and simply washed up on new islands by dumb luck. That the peopling of the Pacific was one long series of happy shipwrecks. It is a tidy story, and it is almost certainly wrong. And the reason it is wrong is genuinely beautiful. Because if you were being blown around at random, the odds of accidentally landing on tiny islands scattered across millions of square miles are basically zero. But more than that, there is a strategy hidden in how they explored, and once you see it, the accident theory falls apart. When you set out into the unknown looking for new land, which way do you sail? You sail into the wind. It sounds backwards, but it is genius. If you head out against the prevailing wind and find nothing, you can always turn around and let that same wind blow you straight back home, safely, along the path you came. You are using the wind as a rope tied back to safety. That is not the behavior of someone lost. That is the behavior of a deliberate explorer managing risk with a plan. And in the 20th century, people finally put the argument to the test. Crews rebuilt the old double canoes from traditional designs and set out to make the ancient crossings for real. One of these canoes sailed thousands of miles across open ocean, guided by a navigator working the old way, with no compass, no charts, no modern gear of any kind, reading only the stars and the swells and the signs in the sky, exactly as his ancestors had. And it worked. It found its distant island, right where the old knowledge said it would be. Watching a piece of living history like that cross the sea did something no argument on paper ever could. The lucky accident story was not just wrong, it quietly sold short one of the greatest intellectual achievements our species has ever managed. And now for the part that reaches even further back, the fact that reframes this entire story. Because you might be assuming all of this is fairly recent. Skilled sailors, 1,000 or 2,000 years ago. But the very first time human beings crossed open ocean was not thousands of years ago. It was tens of thousands. To reach Australia, the ancestors of the first Australians had to cross open sea. And even when the Ice Age had locked up enough water to drop sea levels and shrink the gaps, there were still stretches of deep, open water between the islands. Water with land nowhere in sight on the far side. And people crossed it, at least 50,000 years ago, possibly quite a bit more. And there is a quiet clue buried in that crossing that I love, because when you look at how the first Australians arrived, it does not look like one soggy fisherman washing up alone. The population that took hold was large enough and varied enough that it points to something deliberate. You do not accidentally strand enough men and women on a brand new continent, all at once, to start a thriving people. That takes a group, it takes a plan. It takes people deciding, together, to get into boats and go, across water they could not see the end of, into a land they could not possibly have known was there. 50,000 years ago, someone stood on a beach at the very edge of the known world, looked at an empty sea, and chose to sail out into it. We do not know their name, we never will. But in a real sense, they are the first explorer in all of human history whose journey we can still trace. Which means deliberate ocean voyaging is not some late, advanced trick of civilization. It is one of the oldest things we have ever done. It is older than farming, older than cities, older than writing, older than the wheel, older than almost every single thing you think of as a human achievement. Before we ever planted a field or built a wall, we were already out there, crossing the sea. And I will be honest with you about how far this might reach, because there is one tantalizing, still argued possibility hanging at the edge of all this. There is a plant, the sweet potato, that comes originally from South America, and yet it was growing on Pacific islands, being eaten by Polynesians, long before any European reached either place. So how did a South American plant end up all the way out in the middle of the Pacific? One genuinely serious possibility is that these navigators, the greatest the world had ever seen, sailed all the way to the coast of South America and back, centuries before Columbus crossed the Atlantic in the other direction. Now, this one is debated. Scientists are still arguing over the evidence, and it is not settled, so I am not going to sit here and tell you it is a fact. But the threads are hard to ignore. The plant is South American, it was in Polynesia early. And in some Polynesian languages the word for it sounds strikingly like the word used for that same plant by peoples on the far side of the ocean, in South America, as if the name itself had made the journey along with the route. Maybe that is a coincidence. Maybe the plant somehow drifted on its own. Researchers have argued it every which way, and honestly, good scientists still disagree. But the fact that it is even seriously on the table tells you something about the people we are talking about. So let's pull it together. How did ancient humans cross oceans? Not with better boats than we imagined, though the boats were brilliant. Not by accident, though we spent a long time insisting they were. They did it by turning the entire natural world into an instrument, by memorizing the sky until it became a compass, by feeling the pulse of the sea until the ocean itself told them where the land was hiding, by reading birds and clouds and drifting seeds and the color of the light. They did it by holding an entire science inside their heads, with no page to write it on, and passing it down, voice to voice, for hundreds of generations. And they did it with a kind of courage that is honestly hard to even imagine. The courage to load your family, your animals, and your seedlings into a canoe, turn your back on the only land you have ever known, and sail deliberately over the edge of the world, betting everything you have that your reading of the stars is right. Which brings us all the way back to you, bored on that plane, watching the little airplane crawl across the blue. Because that restlessness you feel, that itch to know what is on the other side of the map, that quiet pull toward the horizon, it is not new. It is the oldest thing about us. You come from a long, unbroken line of people who looked out at an empty, terrifying ocean, an ocean that had every reason to kill them, and instead of turning away, decided they simply had to know what was out there. Every single one of them who sailed and made it is a reason you are here at all. So the next time you cross an ocean without a single thought, half asleep, staring at that glowing screen, remember what it actually took. No screen told them they were halfway. No voice told them the seatbelt sign was on. There was just the horizon, and the choice to keep going toward it. Remember that someone, long ago, made that exact same crossing with nothing but the sky, the sea, and an almost unreasonable amount of nerve. And they did not have a map. They were the map.